The rain hammered against the tall windows of the Sterling Tower, Manhattan's most exclusive fine dining establishment, where a single reservation required a 3-month wait and connections that money alone couldn't buy. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast golden light across tables draped in Italian linen, where the city's elite conducted business over $30 appetizers and $1,000 bottles of wine. Marcus Hale sat at his usual corner table, the one with the perfect view of Central Park's rain-soaked tree line. At 42, he had built Hale Industries from a small tech startup into a billion-dollar empire that dominated 3 continents. His tailored Tom Ford suit probably cost more than most people earned in 6 months, and he wore his success like armor, cold, impenetrable, and designed to keep ordinary people at a distance. He scrolled through his phone with one hand while his other drummed impatiently on the white tablecloth. His assistant had just texted that the Chinese investment group was running 15 minutes late. Marcus hated waiting. Time was money, and every minute wasted was an insult to his carefully constructed schedule. "Excuse me, sir. May I pour your water?" The voice was soft, almost apologetic. Marcus didn't look up. He could tell from the tone, tentative, respectful, subordinate, that it wasn't anyone who mattered. His eyes remained fixed on his phone screen as he gave a barely perceptible nod. A dark hand reached forward, lifting the crystal pitcher with practiced care. Marcus finally glanced up, his face hardening the moment he registered who stood beside him. A black woman in her late 30s wearing the restaurant's standard server uniform, white blouse, black vest, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her name tag read, Grace. She poured the water with steady hands, her movements efficient and unobtrusive. As she set the pitcher down, she offered a polite smile. "Would you like to hear tonight's specials, or would you prefer to wait for your guests?" Marcus stared at her for a long, cold moment. Then he looked away, returning his attention to his phone. "I don't talk to maids." The words hung in the air like ice. Grace's hand froze on the pitcher handle. Around them, conversations at nearby tables stuttered and died as heads turned toward the scene. The silence spread through the dining room like ripples on water. Grace's smile faltered but didn't completely disappear. Years of service work had taught her to absorb insults with grace, to make herself smaller in the presence of people who treated her as furniture. "Of course, sir. I'll have someone else attend to your table." She turned to leave, her movements controlled despite the burning shame that colored her cheeks. Behind the polished veneer of the Sterling Tower, behind her professional smile, Grace carried burdens that would have crushed a weaker person. 3 children at home, a mother with advancing dementia in a care facility she could barely afford, student loans from a degree she'd never been able to use because life had other plans. But she also carried something else, something these people in their expensive suits and entitled attitudes would never expect, something that had gotten her through nights when the world felt impossibly heavy, a gift that had been with her since childhood, nurtured in secret, kept hidden because survival meant being invisible. Marcus watched her retreat with the same indifference he'd shown her arrival. To him, she was just another faceless worker in a world full of people whose only purpose was to serve people like him. He'd already forgotten her name, if he'd even registered it at all. "Marcus Hale, still winning hearts and minds, I see." The voice came from behind him, dripping with amused sarcasm. Marcus turned to find Daniel Crawford sliding into the opposite chair. Daniel was one of the few people Marcus tolerated, a corporate lawyer who'd helped structure several of Hale Industries' most lucrative deals. They weren't exactly friends, but they shared a mutual respect built on years of profitable collaboration. "She'll recover," Marcus said flatly, reaching for the water Grace had poured. "These people need to understand their place. You start treating them like equals, they forget how to do their jobs properly." Daniel raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He'd known Marcus long enough to recognize that arguing about human decency was pointless. Marcus Hale operated on a different frequency than most people, one where empathy was a weakness and kindness was a liability. "The Chinese group is here," Daniel said, gesturing toward the entrance where 3 men in dark suits had just entered, accompanied by a young woman serving as their translator. "Yang Technologies. They're looking to invest heavily in American AI development, and word is they're choosing between you and Brennan Corp." Marcus's eyes sharpened with interest. Brennan Corp was his primary competitor, led by Richard Brennan, a self-made billionaire who'd clawed his way up from nothing, a fact Marcus found distastefully common. This investment could tip the scales decisively in his favor. "Then let's make sure they choose correctly," Marcus said, straightening his tie as the group approached his table. Across the dining room, Grace moved between tables with practiced efficiency, her mind half on her work and half on the calculation she performed every night. Could she pick up an extra shift this weekend? Would her daughter Jasmine's scholarship cover her textbooks? Or would Grace need to pull from the meager savings meant for her mother's care facility? She'd learned long ago not to let people like Marcus Hale affect her. Men like him existed in their own stratosphere, untouchable and unconcerned with the struggles of ordinary people. His words had stung, yes, but they weren't unique. She'd heard worse, she'd survived worse. What those men in their expensive suits didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine, was that Grace Patterson held multiple degrees, spoke 5 languages fluently, and had once been on track for a career in international diplomacy before life had pulled her in a different direction. Before her husband died in a construction accident, leaving her with 3 children and a mountain of debt. Before survival became more important than dreams. She'd made peace with her circumstances. She'd found dignity in honest work, no matter how others viewed it. And she'd taught her children that character wasn't measured by wealth or status, but by how you treated people when no one important was watching. Grace was refilling wine glasses at a table near the kitchen entrance when she noticed the commotion at Marcus Hale's table. The Chinese delegation had arrived, and she could hear the musical tones of Mandarin floating across the dining room. Their translator, a young woman who looked fresh out of college, was speaking rapidly, but something in her body language suggested uncertainty. Grace continued her work, but her ears, trained by years of linguistic study, picked up fragments of the conversation. The translator was struggling. The businessmen were using technical terminology, industry-specific vocabulary that required more than basic language skills. The young woman was doing her best, but Grace could hear the gaps, the hesitations, the moments where meaning got lost in translation. She moved on to the next table, reminding herself that it wasn't her concern. She was here to pour water and clear plates, not to solve problems for billionaires who couldn't be bothered to acknowledge her existence. But as the minutes passed and the conversation at Marcus Hale's table grew increasingly tense, Grace felt something stirring inside her. Not ambition exactly, but a recognition of an opportunity. A chance to use the skills she'd buried under years of survival, to remind herself, if no one else, that she was more than her uniform suggested. The rain continued to drum against the windows as the dinner service pressed forward. Marcus Hale remained oblivious to the woman he'd insulted, focused entirely on the deal he was determined to close. He didn't notice Grace's occasional glances toward his table. He didn't see the way she listened, assessed, and quietly prepared for a moment that would change everything. Because sometimes the most powerful people in the room are the ones nobody sees coming. And tonight in the Sterling Tower, everything was about to shift. The tension at Marcus Hale's table had become palpable. Even from across the dining room, Grace could sense the deal unraveling in real time. The lead investor, Mr. Yang, was speaking rapidly in Mandarin, his tone growing sharper with each sentence. His 2 associates nodded in agreement, their expressions darkening. The young translator's face had gone pale, her hands trembling slightly as she struggled to keep up. Mr. Yang says, "He says the terms are unclear," the translator stammered, her voice barely audible over the ambient noise of the restaurant. "He wants to know about the, she paused, clearly lost. The intellectual property protocols? Marcus leaned forward, his jaw tight with frustration. Tell him our IP protection framework is the most comprehensive in the industry. We have triple-layer encryption, blockchain verification, and exclusive licensing agreements that guarantee. But before the translator could even attempt to convey this, Mr. Yang cut her off with a dismissive wave. He spoke again, faster this time, his words pointed and precise. The translator opened her mouth, closed it, then looked helplessly at Daniel Crawford. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "He's using technical terms I don't. I studied conversational Mandarin, but this is specialized business vocabulary. I don't want to mistranslate something this important." Marcus's face flushed red. Around them, other diners were beginning to notice the commotion. This was exactly the kind of public fumbling that Marcus Hale never allowed in his business dealings. His reputation was built on seamless execution, on being 3 steps ahead of everyone else. And now he was being undermined by a translator who couldn't handle basic business Chinese. "Are you telling me," Marcus said through clenched teeth, "that we're about to lose a $200 million investment because you didn't prepare adequately?" The young woman's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Hale. Get out," Marcus snapped. "You're fired. Daniel, call the agency and tell them to send someone competent." Immediately, Mr. Yang and his associates were already standing, gathering their briefcases with the unmistakable body language of men preparing to leave. One of them spoke in Mandarin to Mr. Yang, who nodded grimly. Grace didn't need a translation to understand what was happening. The deal was dying right before Marcus Hale's eyes, and his arrogance was sealing the coffin. This was the moment. Grace set down the wine bottle she'd been holding and made a decision that would alter the trajectory of her life. She walked toward Marcus Hale's table with steady steps, her heart pounding but her expression calm. Years of dealing with difficult customers had taught her to project confidence, even when she felt anything but. As she approached, Marcus looked up with barely contained rage. "What?" he barked. "Can't you see we're in the middle of—" Grace turned away from him and addressed Mr. Yang directly in flawless Mandarin. Her tone was respectful but confident, her pronunciation precise. "Mr. Yang, please forgive the confusion. If I may, I'd be honored to assist with the translation. I understand you have concerns about the intellectual property protection framework, and I believe I can help clarify Mr. Hale's position." The effect was instantaneous. Mr. Yang's eyebrows rose in surprise. His two associates exchanged glances. Marcus Hale's mouth fell open, his anger momentarily displaced by pure shock. Daniel Crawford actually laughed, a short disbelieving sound that seemed to escape before he could stop it. Mr. Yang studied Grace for a long moment, his sharp eyes assessing her with the same intensity he'd probably used to build his fortune. Then he spoke in Mandarin, testing her. "Your accent suggests advanced study. Where did you learn to speak our language?" Grace smiled, still speaking in Mandarin. "I have a master's degree in international relations from Columbia University, with a specialization in East Asian languages and diplomacy. I studied in Beijing for 2 years. I've also worked as a consultant translator for several international firms, though that was some years ago." The dining room had gone completely silent. Every eye was fixed on the black woman in a server's uniform conducting a fluent business conversation in Mandarin with one of China's most prominent investors. It was as if the natural order of their carefully structured world had suddenly inverted. Mr. Yang's stern expression softened into something resembling respect. He gestured to the empty chair. "Please, sit. I would very much like to continue this conversation properly." Grace hesitated, glancing at Marcus. For the first time since she'd approached his table earlier that evening, he actually looked at her, truly looked at her. His face was a complicated mixture of shock, confusion, and something else. Perhaps embarrassment, though Grace suspected men like Marcus Hale didn't experience that emotion often enough to recognize it. Marcus seemed to be struggling to form words. "I didn't realize you spoke. You didn't ask," Grace said simply, switching back to English. Her tone wasn't accusatory, just factual. "And you made it clear you didn't talk to maids." The words landed like a physical blow. Daniel Crawford coughed into his napkin, poorly disguising another laugh. Several nearby diners weren't even pretending not to watch anymore. Marcus Hale, the man who'd built an empire on his ability to read people and situations, had been completely blindsided by his own prejudice. Mr. Yang said something in Mandarin, his tone amused. Grace translated smoothly. "Mr. Yang says that in China we have a saying, 'Even a dragon respects the hidden master.' He suggests that perhaps American business culture could benefit from such wisdom." Marcus's face darkened, but before he could respond, Daniel kicked him under the table. Grace saw the slight movement. Daniel then stood, offering Grace his chair with an exaggerated bow. "Please join us, I insist. It seems you're exactly the person this conversation needs." Grace looked at her manager, who was watching from near the kitchen entrance with wide eyes. She gave a small nod and he, too stunned to protest, nodded back. Grace sat down, smoothing her uniform, acutely aware that every person in the Sterling Tower was watching this unfold. For the next hour, Grace became the bridge between two worlds. She translated not just words but context, cultural nuances, business implications that a less experienced translator would have missed. When Mr. Yang expressed concerns about data security, Grace didn't just translate the technical terms, she explained the cultural context behind Chinese business anxiety about American tech companies. When Marcus outlined his company's protocols, she found the precise Chinese terminology that conveyed both the technical sophistication and the trustworthiness Mr. Yang needed to hear. As the conversation progressed, something remarkable happened. Mr. Yang began directing his questions to Grace, trusting her not just as a translator but as an advisor, and Grace, drawing on knowledge she'd buried years ago under the weight of survival and responsibility, rose to the occasion. She asked clarifying questions. She identified potential areas of concern before they became problems. She suggested frameworks that could address both parties' needs. Marcus Hale watched in silence, his earlier arrogance crumbling with each passing minute. He'd spent his entire career believing that success was about dominance, about being the smartest person in every room, about refusing to acknowledge anyone he deemed beneath him. And now a woman he dismissed without a second thought was saving the most important deal of his quarter. Finally, after what felt like both an eternity and no time at all, Mr. Yang stood and extended his hand to Marcus. Through grace, he said, "I believe we have the foundation for a partnership. Your technology is impressive, Mr. Hale. But what truly convinces me is that your company employs people of such exceptional caliber and character. If this young woman represents the kind of talent you value, then Hale Industries is the kind of company Yang Technologies wants to work with." Marcus shook his hand, but his eyes were on Grace. "Thank you, Mr. Yang. We appreciate your confidence." As the Chinese delegation prepared to leave, Mr. Yang turned to Grace one final time. In Mandarin, he said, "You have extraordinary gifts. I hope they are properly recognized and compensated." Grace smiled, her response equally warm. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Yang. It was an honor to assist." When they were gone, the dining room slowly returned to its normal rhythm, though Grace could feel dozens of eyes still tracking her movements. She stood, preparing to return to her actual job, but Marcus's voice stopped her. "Wait." The word came out rougher than he probably intended. "I need to. We need to." For perhaps the first time in his adult life, Marcus Hale appeared to be at a loss for words. Grace stood beside the table, waiting. The dining room's ambient noise, the clink of silverware, the murmur of conversations, the soft jazz playing from hidden speakers, seemed to fade into the background. Marcus Hale stared at her as if seeing her for the first time, which in a way he was. Daniel Crawford broke the awkward silence. "Grace, is it?" He gestured to the chair she'd just vacated. "Please sit back down. I think we all need to have a conversation." Grace glanced toward the kitchen where her manager was gesturing frantically for her to return to work. The dinner rush was in full swing, and they were already short-staffed. But something in Daniel's expression, genuine curiosity mixed with what looked like respect, made her hesitate. "I have tables to attend to," she said quietly. "I can't just—" "How much do you make here?" Marcus interrupted, his voice still carrying that edge of command, though it was softer now, uncertain. Grace's spine stiffened. "That's not really your concern, Mr. Hale. Humor me." She met his eyes steadily. Years of being overlooked, of being treated as invisible, had taught her when to be diplomatic and when to stand her ground. "I make $12 an hour plus tips. On a good night, I take home maybe $150. On a bad night, significantly less." Marcus pulled out his phone, tapped something quickly, then showed the screen to Daniel. "What's the starting salary for an executive translator at Hale Industries?" Daniel raised his eyebrows. "For someone with her credentials? Probably 120, 130 base, plus benefits, bonuses, stock options. But Marcus, you can't just—" "Why not?" Marcus looked back at Grace, and this time there was something different in his expression. Not quite humility, but perhaps the first crack in a wall he'd spent decades building. "You have a master's degree from Columbia. You speak how many languages?" 5 fluently, Grace said. 7 conversationally. 5 fluently, Marcus repeated as if testing the words. "And you're working as a server at the Sterling Tower for $12 an hour. Why?" The question hung in the air. It was the kind of question people asked when they'd never had to choose between pride and survival, when they'd never had to sacrifice dreams for responsibilities that arrived without warning or mercy. Grace could have told him about her husband, Michael, a construction worker who died when faulty scaffolding collapsed on a midtown building site 7 years ago. She could have described the lawsuit that went nowhere because the contracting company had filed for bankruptcy the day after the accident. She could have explained how her middle-class life had evaporated overnight, leaving her with 3 children under 10, a mortgage she couldn't afford, and student loans that didn't care about widows or grief. She could have told him about the prestigious consulting firm that had offered her a position just weeks before Michael died, how she'd had to turn it down because the starting date conflicted with funeral arrangements, and how by the time she'd tried to reconnect, they'd filled the position and moved on. She could have described the dozens of applications she'd submitted afterward, how each rejection letter felt like confirmation that the world had no room for a grieving mother trying to rebuild. But she didn't say any of that, because Marcus Hale hadn't earned her story. Life happened, she said simply. And I adapted. Now if you'll excuse me, I really do need to get back to work. She turned to leave, but Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. Wait, please. The word please sounded foreign coming from his mouth, as if he weren't quite sure how to use it. I'm offering you a job at Hale Industries as senior translator and cultural liaison. Triple your current salary to start, full benefits, and we can negotiate from there based on performance. Grace turned back slowly. You're offering me a job? Right now? You don't know anything about me except that I can translate Mandarin. You don't know if I'm reliable, if I have a criminal record, if I can even pass a background check. Can you? Marcus interrupted. Of course I can, but that's not the point. Then what is the point? Grace took a step closer to the table, her voice low but firm. The point, Mr. Hale, is that an hour ago you wouldn't even look at me. You told me in front of a room full of people that you don't talk to maids. You didn't see a person. You saw a uniform, a role, something beneath your notice. And now, because I turned out to be useful to you, because I saved your deal and protected your ego, suddenly I'm worth acknowledging. The dining room had gone quiet again. Several nearby tables weren't even pretending not to listen. Marcus's face flushed, but to his credit, he didn't look away. You're right, he said, and the admission seemed to cost him something. I behaved poorly. I made assumptions that were. He paused, searching for a word that wouldn't sound like a corporate PR statement. Wrong. And inexcusable. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. That's a start, Daniel murmured, though Grace wasn't sure if Marcus even heard him. But regardless of how we got here, Marcus continued, the offer stands. You have skills my company needs. You demonstrated professionalism and expertise under pressure. And yes, maybe it took me witnessing that to recognize your value. But now that I have, I'd be a fool to let you walk away. Grace studied him for a long moment. She'd spent 7 years cleaning tables, pouring water, absorbing insults both subtle and overt from people who treated service workers as props in their own narratives. She'd learned to read people, to understand the difference between genuine contrition and convenient apology. Marcus Hale wasn't quite at genuine yet, but he wasn't entirely calculating either. He was somewhere in between, a man confronting the uncomfortable realization that his worldview had a significant blind spot. I need to think about it, Grace said finally. It's not a small decision. I have responsibilities, children who depend on me, a life that's carefully balanced even if it's not what I'd originally planned. I can't just upend everything on impulse. Of course, Marcus said quickly. He pulled a business card from his wallet and slid it across the table. My direct line. Call me tomorrow or the next day or whenever you're ready to discuss it seriously. We can talk details, negotiate terms, whatever you need. Grace picked up the card, the thick cardstock embossed with gold lettering. Marcus Hale, CEO, Hale Industries. A week ago, she would have laughed at the absurdity of holding such a card, of being recruited by a billionaire in the middle of her shift. Now she just felt tired and cautious, and aware that opportunities this significant usually came with complications she couldn't yet see. I should get back to work, she said again, pocketing the card. This time, neither Marcus nor Daniel stopped her. She walked back toward the kitchen, feeling the weight of dozens of stairs following her across the dining room. Her manager intercepted her near the service station, his expression caught between awe and anxiety. Grace, what the hell just happened? Did Marcus Hale really offer you a job? Are you leaving? Because if you're leaving, you need to give 2 weeks' notice, and we're already short-staffed for the weekend. I'm not leaving tonight, Tom, Grace said wearily. Right now, I'm just trying to finish my shift. But even as she said it, she knew something fundamental had shifted. The careful equilibrium she'd maintained for 7 years, work, children, bills, survival, had been disrupted, and she wasn't sure yet if that disruption was a blessing or another burden she'd have to carry. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Grace moved through her duties mechanically, her mind racing with possibilities and questions. What would it mean to work at Hale Industries? Could she really trust Marcus Hale's offer? Or would she show up for her first day only to discover the position had been filled, the offer rescinded, the door quietly closed? And even if the offer was genuine, was she ready to re-enter a professional world she'd been forced to leave behind? She thought about her children. Jasmine, 15 and brilliant, who'd earned a scholarship to a prestigious private school, but still needed money for books and supplies. Marcus Jr., 13 and struggling with the absence of the father he barely remembered. And little Destiny, just turned 9, who still asked sometimes why mommy had to work such long hours and miss so many school events. A better job could mean more time with them, better opportunities, a future that looked less like survival and more like actually living. But it could also mean something else. It could mean working for a man who'd shown her in the clearest possible terms exactly how he viewed people he considered beneath him. Could people like Marcus Hale really change? Or would she just be setting herself up for a different kind of disappointment? When her shift finally ended at 11 p.m., Grace changed out of her uniform in the staff locker room and stepped out into the Manhattan night. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflecting the neon glow of a city that never quite went dark. She pulled her jacket tighter and headed for the subway station, her feet aching in shoes that desperately needed replacing. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother's care facility. "Grace, this is Nurse Jennifer. Your mom had a good day today. She asked about you. Also wanted to remind you that payment for this month is due by Friday." Grace closed her eyes briefly. The payment was $800, money she'd planned to cobble together from this week's tips and a small advance on next week's paycheck. It would leave her account dangerously low, but she'd managed before. She always managed. Except now there was Marcus Hale's business card in her pocket, a potential lifeline to something better, or at least something different. She descended into the subway station, joining the late-night crowd of service workers, hospital staff, and night shift laborers who kept the city running while the wealthy slept in their penthouse apartments. These were her people, Grace thought. The invisible ones. The ones who poured water and cleaned floors and made the world comfortable for people who'd never learned their names. Grace's apartment in the Bronx was a 40-minute subway ride from the Sterling Tower, but it might as well have been on another planet. The building was a pre-war walk-up with peeling paint and a temperamental heating system, sandwiched between a bodega and a laundromat that ran until 2 in the morning. But it was home, and more importantly, it was affordable. She climbed the 3 flights of stairs quietly, careful not to wake the neighbors who had work shifts starting before dawn. The key stuck in the lock. It always did, but eventually yielded with the particular wiggle and twist technique she'd perfected over the years. Inside, the apartment was dark except for the glow of a lamp in the living room. Grace found her oldest daughter, Jasmine, curled up on the couch with a textbook spread across her lap, her eyes struggling to stay open. "Baby, what are you still doing up?" Grace asked softly, setting down her purse and slipping off her shoes. Jasmine looked up, blinking away exhaustion. At 15, she looked so much like her father that sometimes Grace had to catch her breath. The same deep brown eyes, the same determined set of her jaw. "I have a calculus test tomorrow. I wanted to wait up for you. You should be sleeping. You need rest for that test." "I know, but..." Jasmine closed the textbook and sat up straighter. "Mom, Mr. Chen from the scholarship office called again. They need the payment for my textbooks by next week or they're going to have to reassess my scholarship status for next semester." Grace felt the familiar weight settle on her chest. The prestigious Harrington Academy had given Jasmine a full tuition scholarship, but books, supplies, and fees weren't covered. She'd known this conversation was coming, had been preparing for it, but hearing it out loud made it real in a way that statistics and budgets never quite achieved. "How much?" Grace asked, though she already knew. $1,200. Grace did the math automatically, the same calculation she performed every day. After rent, utilities, her mother's care facility, food, Marcus Jr.'s asthma medication, and the minimum payments on the debts she'd been chipping away at for 7 years, there was nothing left. She'd been planning to pick up extra shifts, to maybe ask Tom about working some lunch services in addition to her dinner shifts. But even then, her hand went unconsciously to her jacket pocket, where Marcus Hale's business card rested like a secret. "We'll figure it out," Grace said, the same words she'd been saying for 7 years. "We always do." Jasmine's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, I know how hard you work. I see you leave before we wake up and come home after we're asleep. I see you counting money at the kitchen table when you think we're not watching. And I hate that my education is making things harder for you." Grace crossed the room quickly and pulled her daughter into a tight embrace. "Don't you dare think that. Your education is not a burden. It's an investment. It's the whole point of everything I do. You are brilliant, baby, and you deserve every opportunity to shine." They held each other for a long moment, and Grace felt the familiar ache of wanting to give her children more than she could provide. When Michael was alive, they'd had plans. They'd been building toward something, and then one day, a piece of scaffolding failed an inspection that was never properly conducted, and their entire future collapsed along with it. "Go to bed," Grace whispered. You're going to ace that calculus test, and we're going to figure out the textbook situation. I promise." After Jasmine reluctantly headed to the bedroom she shared with Destiny, Grace sat alone in the living room, Marcus Hale's business card now in her hands. She turned it over, studying the embossed lettering in the dim lamplight. One phone call could change everything. Triple her salary, benefits, stability. But at what cost? She thought about the way Marcus had looked at her, or rather hadn't looked at her when she'd first approached his table. She remembered the cold dismissal in his voice when he'd said, "I don't talk to maids." That wasn't just rudeness. It was a worldview, a fundamental belief that some people mattered and some people didn't, determined entirely by their perceived status and utility. Could she work for someone like that? Could she walk into Hale Industries every day knowing that her boss had once considered her beneath his notice? Grace's phone buzzed. A text from her mother's care facility again. "Grace, we hate to bother you, but we wanted to give you a heads up that we'll need to discuss alternative arrangements if payment is delayed this month. Your mother's care is our priority, but we have operational costs to consider." Alternative arrangements. The polite euphemism for, "We'll have to move your mother to a state facility." Grace had visited those places. She'd seen the overcrowded rooms, the overworked staff, the residents parked in wheelchairs in hallways because there wasn't enough space in the common areas. Her mother, who'd been a vibrant school teacher before Alzheimer's began stealing her memories piece by piece, deserved better than that. They all deserved better than this. Grace pulled out her laptop, a refurbished model she'd bought 3 years ago, and opened her email. She hadn't updated her resume in years, hadn't even thought about applying for corporate positions since those first desperate months after Michael's death. But maybe it was time to take Marcus Hale's offer seriously, not because she'd forgiven his behavior, but because her children needed textbooks and her mother needed care and survival, sometimes meant swallowing pride. She spent the next 2 hours updating her credentials, listing her languages, detailing her master's thesis on cross-cultural business negotiations in East Asian markets. On paper, she looked impressive, like someone who belonged in a corner office at a company like Hale Industries, not serving water to people who couldn't be bothered to learn her name. By the time she finished, it was nearly 2 in the morning. Grace sent the updated resume to herself, then sat staring at Marcus Hale's phone number. Her finger hovered over the digits, ready to compose a message. But something stopped her, some instinct she couldn't quite name. Instead, she opened a search engine and typed, "Marcus Hale, Hale Industries." The results were exactly what she expected. Articles about his business success, profiles in financial magazines, photos of him at charity galas and industry conferences. He was, by all accounts, a brilliant CEO who'd built his empire through aggressive innovation and ruthless efficiency. Several articles mentioned his difficult reputation, his demanding management style, his expectation of absolute excellence from his employees. Grace dug deeper, looking for something more personal. And then she found it. An article from 8 years ago, before Hale Industries had become the giant it was now. The headline read, "Tech Startup CEO Settles Discrimination Lawsuit Out of Court." Grace's heart sank as she read the details. A former employee, a black woman named Patricia Collins, had sued Hale Industries for racial discrimination and hostile work environment. She claimed she'd been passed over for promotions repeatedly despite exceptional performance reviews, that she'd been subjected to microaggressions and dismissive treatment by leadership, and that when she'd complained to HR, she'd been quietly pushed out. The case had been settled confidentially, with both parties agreeing not to discuss the terms publicly. But the fact that it had happened at all told Grace something important about Marcus Hale's track record. This wasn't just one bad night where he'd been rude to a server. This was a pattern. Grace closed her laptop, feeling the weight of reality settling back onto her shoulders. She wanted to believe people could change, that the shock of tonight had genuinely affected Marcus Hale, that his job offer was more than just a band-aid on his bruised ego. But the evidence suggested otherwise. Still, the business card sat on the coffee table, a tangible reminder of what could be. Grace picked it up one more time, turning it over in her hands. The next morning arrived too quickly. Grace woke to the sound of her alarm at 6 a.m., having slept only 3 hours. She went through her morning routine on autopilot. Shower, coffee, wake the kids, pack lunches, help Destiny find her homework, remind Marcus Jr. to take his inhaler to school, give Jasmine a pep talk about her calculus test. "Mom, you look exhausted," Jasmine observed over breakfast. "Did you sleep at all?" "Enough," Grace lied. I'm fine, baby. Just had some things on my mind. After the children left for school, Grace sat alone in the quiet apartment, coffee growing cold in her hands. She had 4 hours before her lunch shift started at the Sterling Tower. 4 hours to make a decision that could change everything. She picked up her phone and stared at Marcus Hale's number. Her thumb hovered over the call button, and then, instead of calling, she did something else entirely. Something that surprised even herself. She opened her contacts and scrolled to a name she hadn't called in 3 years. Dr. Sarah Mendez, her former thesis advisor from Columbia. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar, warm voice answered. Grace Patterson, is that really you? Hi, Dr. Mendez, I know it's been a while, but I was hoping I could ask you for some advice. Of course. I've wondered how you were doing. I tried to reach out after your husband passed, but I wasn't sure if you wanted to be contacted. How are you? How are the children? Oh. As Grace felt tears prick her eyes at the genuine concern in her former mentor's voice. We're managing. It's been hard, but we're managing. Actually, that's part of why I'm calling. Something unexpected happened last night and I'm not sure how to handle it. She told Dr. Mendez the whole story. The dismissal at the restaurant, the Chinese investors, the translation that saved the deal, and Marcus Hale's sudden job offer. She also mentioned the discrimination lawsuit she'd found online. Dr. Mendez listened in silence until Grace finished. Then she sighed deeply. Grace, that's a complicated situation. On one hand, you need the opportunity and you've certainly earned it. On the other hand, going to work for someone with that kind of history could be setting yourself up for disappointment. Or worse. I know, Grace said quietly, but I keep thinking about Jasmine's textbooks and my mother's care facility, and how I've been barely keeping our heads above water for 7 years. This could be the lifeline we need. It could be, Dr. Mendez agreed. But Grace, you're one of the most talented students I ever taught. If Hale Industries is interested in you, other companies would be too. Have you considered using this as motivation to apply elsewhere? Places that might value you from the start, not just after you've proven yourself indispensable? The suggestion was so simple, so obvious that Grace felt foolish for not considering it seriously before. Grace sat with Dr. Mendez's words echoing in her mind long after they'd ended the call. The idea of applying to other companies, of shopping herself around rather than accepting the first offer that came along, felt both empowering and terrifying. It had been so long since she'd thought of herself as someone with options, someone who could be selective about opportunities rather than desperately grateful for scraps. But Dr. Mendez had also said something else, something that stuck with Grace even more. Sometimes the people who need to learn the hardest lessons are the ones in positions of power. If you do decide to take Hale's offer, you might be exactly the person who can teach him something important. But that should be your choice, not your only option. Grace spent the next hour doing something she hadn't done in years. She researched job opportunities, international consulting firms, translation services for tech companies, cultural liaison positions at multinational corporations. With her credentials and language skills, there were dozens of potential positions. Not all would pay as much as Marcus Hale had offered, but many came close. And they came without the baggage of working for a man who'd publicly humiliated her. By the time she needed to leave for her lunch shift, Grace had submitted 3 applications and bookmarked 7 more positions to apply for later. She felt different somehow, not quite hopeful but less trapped. Less like she was drowning and more like she was treading water with the shore finally in sight. The Sterling Tower felt different too when she arrived. Word had spread about what happened the previous night. Grace could see it in the way her co-workers looked at her. Part admiration, part curiosity, part something else she couldn't quite name. Maybe envy, maybe concern. Tom, her manager, pulled her aside before the lunch service started. Grace, I need to know, are you planning to leave? Because if you are, I need time to find a replacement and… I haven't made any decisions yet, Tom, Grace said firmly. When I do, you'll be the first to know. But right now, I'm here to work my shift. Okay. Tom held up his hands defensively. It's just that, look, what you did last night was incredible. Everyone's talking about it. But it's also made things complicated. Some of the regular customers have been asking about you specifically, wanting you to serve their tables. And honestly, I don't know how to handle that. You're a server, not some kind of celebrity translator. Grace understood what he wasn't saying, that her moment in the spotlight had disrupted the carefully maintained invisibility that made places like the Sterling Tower function smoothly. Rich people wanted their service staff to be competent, but forgettable, present, but never intrusive. By revealing her full capabilities, she'd broken that unspoken rule. I'll just do my job like always, Grace said. Nothing needs to change. But of course, everything had already changed. During the lunch rush, Grace noticed several customers watching her more closely than usual. A few asked her questions. Is it true you speak 5 languages? Did you really save Marcus Hale's deal? Questions she deflected politely while taking orders and delivering food. But the strangest moment came when a woman in an expensive suit flagged her down and handed her a business card. I'm Rebecca Thornton, VP of International Relations at Meridian Corp, the woman said quietly. I heard about what happened here last night. We're always looking for talented translators and cultural consultants. If you're interested in exploring opportunities, give me a call. Grace pocketed the card, her 4th business card in less than 24 hours. The universe, it seemed, was conspiring to give her options. She was clearing a table near the window when she saw him, Marcus Hale, entering the restaurant with 2 men in suits she recognized from business news channels. Her heart rate kicked up involuntarily. Part of her wanted to disappear into the kitchen to avoid the awkward confrontation that was surely coming. But another part of her, the part that had spent the morning applying for jobs and reclaiming her sense of professional worth, straightened her spine and continued working. Marcus spotted her almost immediately. Their eyes met across the dining room, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then Marcus said something to his companions and walked toward her, leaving them at the host stand. Grace, he said when he reached her, I wasn't sure you'd still be here. I work here, she replied simply, stacking plates with practiced efficiency. Did you think I'd quit without notice? I didn't know what to think. He paused, seeming to struggle with words, an unusual state for a man who commanded boardrooms with ease. Have you considered my offer? Grace set down the plates and turned to face him fully. In the daylight streaming through the windows, she could see details she'd missed the night before. The fine lines around his eyes that suggested he didn't sleep enough, the tension in his jaw that spoke of constant stress, the expensive watch that probably cost more than her annual rent. He was still the arrogant billionaire who'd dismissed her without a glance, but he was also, she realized, a human being carrying his own burdens. That didn't excuse his behavior, but it complicated her anger. I've been considering a lot of things, Grace said carefully. Your offer is one of them, but I've also been doing some research, Mr. Hale, about your company, about its history. Marcus's expression shifted, a flicker of something, concern, guilt, passing across his features. You found the lawsuit. I did. And you want to know if history would repeat itself. I want to know if I'd be walking into a situation where my talent is valued only until it becomes inconvenient, where I'm celebrated for saving a deal but still seen as fundamentally less than the people I work alongside. Grace kept her voice level, professional, but there was steel underneath. I want to know if you're offering me a job because you genuinely recognize my worth, or because you're trying to feel better about how you treated me. The question landed like a punch. Marcus flinched visibly, and Grace saw several nearby diners turning to watch the exchange. She didn't care. She'd spent 7 years being invisible, being careful, being whatever she needed to be to survive. For once, she was going to speak her truth and let the consequences fall where they would. That's a fair question, Marcus said quietly. And I don't know if I have an answer that will satisfy you. The truth is, both things are probably true. I am trying to correct a mistake. Several mistakes, actually. But I'm also a businessman, and I don't make offers unless I believe they benefit my company. You demonstrated skills last night that my organization desperately needs. Not just language abilities, but cultural intelligence, quick thinking under pressure, and the ability to build trust in high-stakes situations. Patricia Collins had similar skills, Grace said, watching his reaction. According to the lawsuit, she also had excellent performance reviews. But that didn't protect her from discrimination, did it? Marcus's jaw tightened. No, it didn't. And I won't insult you by making excuses for what happened. Patricia Collins experienced treatment that was unacceptable, and it happened on my watch. I settled that lawsuit because she deserved compensation, and because I was ashamed that my company had become a place where someone could feel devalued and dismissed. But did anything actually change? Grace pressed. Or did you just write a check and move on? Both, Marcus admitted. I wrote the check, but I also... Look, I'm not going to claim I became some enlightened champion of diversity overnight. I didn't. I went to the mandatory training sessions. I reviewed our HR policies. I made sure we had the right language in our employee handbook. But I didn't do the harder work of examining my own biases, my own assumptions about who gets to be taken seriously and who doesn't. Until last night. When you held up a mirror and forced me to see myself clearly. Grace studied him, trying to determine if he was telling the truth or just saying what he thought she wanted to hear. And what did you see when you looked in that mirror? Someone I didn't particularly like, Marcus said bluntly. Someone who'd let success turn him into an asshole who judges people based on their uniforms instead of their capabilities. Someone who'd become exactly the kind of person he used to despise when he was starting out with nothing. There was something raw in his admission, something that felt genuine rather than calculated. Grace found herself softening slightly, though she kept her guard up. Mr. Hale, I appreciate your honesty, but understanding you have a problem and actually fixing it are two different things. I need more than words. If I were to consider working at Hale Industries, and I'm not saying I will, I'd need concrete assurances. Not just about my position and compensation, but about the culture I'd be walking into. I'd need to know that I wouldn't be the only person of color in leadership meetings. I'd need to know that my voice would carry the same weight as anyone else's, regardless of where I came from or what I looked like. Marcus nodded slowly. What if we put it in writing? A contract that specifies not just your salary and benefits, but also your authority, your direct reporting structure, and clear mechanisms for addressing any concerns about discrimination or unequal treatment. I'll have our legal team draft something, and you can have your own lawyer review it before signing anything. Grace raised an eyebrow. You think I have a lawyer? You will by the end of the week if you take this job, Marcus said. Consider it one of your benefits. Full legal representation for employment matters, paid by the company. It was a generous offer, more than generous. It suggested that Marcus was serious about making this work, about not repeating past mistakes. But Grace had learned the hard way that good intentions didn't always translate to lasting change. I'll think about it, she said finally. But Mr. Hale, you should know, I've also been applying to other positions, companies that might not pay quite as much as you're offering, but where I wouldn't have to wonder if my boss secretly thinks I'm beneath him. Instead of looking offended, Marcus actually smiled, a small, rueful expression that made him look younger and less intimidating. Good. You should have options. You should explore them. And honestly, if another company makes you a better offer, take it. But I hope you'll at least give me a chance to compete for your talent. Not because you owe me anything. You don't. But because I think we could do remarkable work together. And because I could learn something from you that might make me better at this whole being human thing I've been struggling with. The admission was so unexpected, so unguarded, that Grace found herself smiling despite herself. That's quite an endorsement. Come work for me, I'm terrible at being human. And at least it's honest marketing, Marcus said, and there was actual humor in his eyes now. Grace's phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She glanced at it quickly, a text from Jasmine. Mom, I got a 98 on my calculus test. Mr. Kim said it was one of the best scores in the class. Pride surged through Grace's chest, momentarily displacing all her complicated feelings about Marcus Hale and job offers and impossible decisions. Her brilliant daughter, who studied by lamplight while waiting up for her mother to come home from work. Her daughter who deserved every opportunity the world could offer. Good news? Marcus asked. My daughter aced her calculus test, Grace said, unable to keep the smile off her face. You have children? 3. Jasmine is 15, Marcus Jr. is 13, and Destiny just turned 9. Marcus blinked, clearly processing this information. You're raising 3 children on a server's salary. Single mother, Grace clarified. Their father died 7 years ago, but yes, we manage. Something shifted in Marcus's expression, recognition perhaps, or respect. And you still found time to maintain fluency in 5 languages. I study after they go to bed. Old textbooks from grad school, language apps, international news broadcasts. Grace shrugged. You make time for what matters. Yes, Marcus said quietly. You do. They stood in silence for a moment, the noise of the lunch service flowing around them. Grace had tables to attend, orders to take, water glasses to refill. Marcus had whatever important business had brought him here with his suited companions, but neither of them moved. Finally, Marcus pulled out another business card. Apparently, he carried an endless supply, and wrote something on the back before handing it to her. That's my personal cell number. Not the office line, not my assistant's number. Mine. If you decide you want to discuss this further, call me directly. Anytime. Grace took the card, noting the careful handwriting. Why does this feel less like a job recruitment and more like you're trying to make amends? Maybe it's both, Marcus said. Maybe I'm trying to build a better company and become a better person at the same time. Is that allowed? I suppose that depends on whether you actually follow through. Then I guess you'll have to stick around long enough to find out. Marcus smiled again, then gestured toward his waiting companions. I should let you get back to work, and I should probably feed my executives before they get cranky, but Grace, thank you for last night, for this conversation, and for not writing me off completely despite having every reason to. He walked away before she could respond, leaving Grace standing in the middle of the Sterling Towers dining room with 2 business cards, a head full of questions, and the strangest feeling that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't quite predict. 3 days later, Grace found herself standing outside the gleaming glass tower that housed Hale Industries headquarters in downtown Manhattan. The building stretched 40 stories into the gray November sky, its reflective surface catching the morning light and throwing it back in sharp angles. She'd passed this building 100 times on her way to work, never imagining she'd one day walk through its doors as anything other than a visitor. But here she was, wearing her best interview suit, a charcoal gray ensemble she'd purchased 8 years ago for her consultation firm interviews. Still professional, but slightly outdated. She'd pulled her hair back in a neat bun, applied minimal makeup, and given herself the same pep talk she'd given Jasmine before her calculus test. You belong here. You've earned this. Don't let anyone make you feel small. The decision to come had been complicated. Over the past 3 days, Grace had received callbacks from 2 of the companies she'd applied to, including an impressive offer from Meridian Corp, the woman who'd given her the business card at the Sterling Tower. The salary was competitive, the benefits solid, and Rebecca Thornton had been warm and professional during their phone conversation. But Grace kept thinking about Marcus Hale's words. Maybe I'm trying to build a better company and become a better person at the same time. There was something compelling about the possibility of being part of that transformation, of not just finding a safe harbor, but actually helping to change the culture of an organization that desperately needed it. Or maybe she was being naive. Maybe Marcus would revert to his old patterns the moment she became inconvenient. Maybe the whole thing was a setup for disappointment. Dr. Mendez had advised her to trust her instincts but verify everything. Get it in writing, Grace. Every promise, every assurance, and make sure you have an exit strategy if things go wrong. So Grace had done exactly that. She'd consulted with an employment attorney, pro bono thanks to a Columbia alumni connection, who'd helped her draft a list of contract requirements. Now she was walking into Hale Industries with a folder full of documents, a clear sense of her worth, and the knowledge that she had other options if this didn't work out. The lobby was exactly what she'd expected. Marble floors, contemporary art on the walls, a sleek reception desk staffed by impeccably dressed employees. Grace approached the desk, her heart pounding but her voice steady. Grace Patterson, I have a meeting with Marcus Hale. The receptionist's eyebrows rose slightly. Apparently not many people had direct meetings with the CEO, but she recovered quickly and typed something into her computer. Of course, Ms. Patterson. Mr. Hale is expecting you. Take the executive elevator to the 40th floor. His assistant will meet you there. The elevator ride felt both impossibly long and too short. Grace used the mirrored walls to check her appearance one final time, then took a deep breath and stepped out into a corridor that screamed executive power, floor-to-ceiling windows, abstract sculptures, and a hushed atmosphere that suggested important decisions were made here daily. A woman in her 50s with silver hair and a kind smile approached her immediately. Ms. Patterson? I'm Helen, Mr. Hale's executive assistant. It's a pleasure to meet you. I've heard remarkable things about you. All good, I hope, Grace said, managing a smile despite her nerves. Exceptional, actually. Follow me, please. Mr. Hale is finishing up a call, but he'll be with you shortly. Helen led her past a series of offices and conference rooms, each more impressive than the last, until they reached a corner suite with panoramic views of the Manhattan skyline. The office was enormous, bigger than Grace's entire apartment, with modern furniture, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a conference table that could seat 12 people. Marcus stood by the windows, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing emphatically as he spoke in what Grace recognized as Mandarin. He was arguing about contract terms, his fluency impressive but his pronunciation slightly off in ways that would be obvious to a native speaker. When he saw Grace, he wrapped up the conversation quickly and set down the phone. Grace, thank you for coming. He crossed the office to shake her hand, and she noticed he seemed less polished than at the Sterling Tower. His tie was slightly loosened, his hair looked like he'd run his hands through it multiple times, and there was genuine warmth in his expression. Can I get you coffee? Water? Helen makes the best coffee on the East Coast. Water is fine, thank you. They settled at the conference table rather than his imposing desk. a choice Grace appreciated, as it felt more like a conversation between equals than a traditional boss-employee dynamic. Marcus opened a folder that Grace recognized as containing her resume and credentials. "I've had my team do a thorough background check," Marcus said, then quickly added, "I hope that doesn't offend you. It's standard procedure for all executive hires." "I expected it," Grace said calmly. "What did you find?" "That you're exactly who you said you were. Columbia graduate, master's in international relations, fluency in 5 languages, previous consulting experience with Chen & Associates before." He paused delicately. "Before your husband's accident. I'm sorry for your loss, by the way. I should have said that earlier." "Thank you." Grace kept her voice professional, not wanting to delve into personal territory that might make her emotional. "Did your background check turn up anything concerning?" "Only that you're wildly overqualified to be working as a server, and that our gain would be several other restaurants' loss." Marcus slid a thick document across the table. "This is the contract my legal team drafted based on our previous conversation. I want you to review it carefully, with your own attorney if you have one, before making any decisions." Grace opened the folder and began reading. The salary was indeed triple what she made at the Sterling Tower, $140,000 annually to start, with performance bonuses that could push it higher, full health insurance for her and her children, 4 weeks of paid vacation, a retirement plan with company matching, stock options that would vest over 4 years. But more importantly, there were clauses addressing the concerns she'd raised. A clear reporting structure that had her working directly with the executive team, language guaranteeing equal treatment and providing specific mechanisms for addressing discrimination complaints, a commitment to diversity training for all staff, with her input on the curriculum, and a severance package that would provide 6 months of salary if she were terminated for any reason other than gross misconduct. Essentially, insurance against being quietly pushed out like Patricia Collins. "This is..." Grace looked up, genuinely surprised. "This is more comprehensive than I expected." "I had help," Marcus admitted. "After our conversation, I reached out to Patricia Collins, asked her what I should have done differently, what would have made her feel valued and protected. She was gracious enough to speak with me, though she had every right to hang up. Her suggestions formed the basis for those contract clauses." Grace felt something shift in her chest, a cautious hope that maybe, just maybe, Marcus Hale was serious about change. "You contacted her? Why?" "Because you were right. Understanding I have a problem and fixing it are 2 different things. I needed to hear directly from someone I'd failed, to understand the specific ways that my company's culture had hurt her. It was..." He paused, seeming to search for words. "It was one of the most uncomfortable conversations of my life, and one of the most important." "What did she tell you?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "She told me that the money from the settlement helped, but what really hurt was feeling invisible, feeling like her contributions didn't matter because she didn't fit the image of what a successful executive was supposed to look like. She told me about meetings where her ideas were dismissed until a white male colleague repeated them, about being mistaken for administrative staff despite being a senior analyst, about the hundreds of small cuts that eventually bled her dry." Grace nodded slowly, recognizing the experiences Patricia had described. She'd seen similar dynamics play out in academic settings, in consulting firms, in every professional space she'd ever occupied, the subtle erosions of dignity that added up over time. "She also told me," Marcus continued, "that if I was serious about hiring you, I needed to understand that bringing in one talented person of color doesn't fix a systemic problem, that I needed to look at my entire leadership team, my hiring practices, my company culture, and be willing to make uncomfortable changes." "And are you?" Grace asked directly. "Willing to make those changes?" "I'm willing to try, with guidance from people who understand these issues better than I do. Which brings me to something I want to propose." Marcus pulled out another document. "In addition to the translator and cultural liaison role, I'd like to create a new position, Director of Inclusion and International Relations. It would be you, working with HR and executive leadership to help transform our company culture, while also leveraging your language skills and international expertise." Grace's eyes widened. That's a significant responsibility. You'd have a team, budget authority, direct access to me and the board, and a salary commensurate with the role, $180,000 annually." Marcus met her gaze steadily. "I know I'm asking a lot. I know I'm essentially asking you to fix problems I helped create. but I genuinely believe you're the person who can do it. And I'm willing to put real resources behind that belief." Grace's mind raced. This was beyond anything she'd imagined when she'd first considered Marcus's offer. This wasn't just a job. It was an opportunity to shape an entire organization, to create the kind of inclusive environment she'd always wanted to work in. It was also an enormous risk, putting herself in a position where she'd be fighting institutional inertia and potentially facing resistance from executives who liked things the way they were. "I need to be honest with you," Grace said carefully. "I have another offer, from Meridian Corp. It's a good position with good people, and there's much less risk involved." "I know," Marcus said, surprising her. "Rebecca Thornton called me yesterday. Professional courtesy, checking my references on you. I told her you'd be an exceptional asset to any organization lucky enough to hire you." Grace blinked. "You gave me a good reference to a competitor. You said you wanted options. You deserved honest references." Marcus smiled slightly. "Though I'll admit I'm hoping you'll choose us. Not because I'm competing with Rebecca, she's a good person and Meridian is a solid company, but because I think we need you more, and because I think the work you could do here might be more meaningful, even if it's harder." It was a compelling argument, made more convincing by the fact that Marcus seemed genuinely willing to support her vision, rather than just using her as window dressing for a diversity initiative. Grace took a deep breath. "If I accept this position, and I'm not saying I will yet, I need you to understand something. I'm not going to be quiet or polite when I see things that need to change. I'm not going to smile and nod when I encounter the kind of dismissive behavior you showed me at the Sterling Tower. I'll be professional, but I'll also be direct. Sometimes, uncomfortably so." "Good," Marcus said firmly. "That's exactly what I need. What this company needs. Someone who won't let us coast on good intentions or get away with half measures. And if other executives push back, if they complain that I'm being too aggressive or demanding too much, then they can bring their concerns to me, and I'll remind them that I hired you specifically for your expertise and judgment. Your authority comes directly from me, Grace. That's in the contract. Nobody gets to undermine or overrule you without going through me first." Grace studied the contract again, reading through the specific clauses that outlined her authority and protection. Everything she'd asked for was there, in clear legal language that would be enforceable if things went wrong. Dr. Mendez's advice echoed in her mind. "Get it in writing." "I need 24 hours, Grace said finally. "I want my attorney to review this contract one more time, and I need to talk to my children about what this change would mean for our family." "Of course. Take the time you need." Marcus stood, extending his hand. "But Grace, I want you to know, whatever you decide, I'm grateful for the conversation. You've already taught me more about leadership in 3 days than I learned in the previous decade." Grace shook his hand, feeling the firmness of his grip and seeing something in his eyes that looked like genuine respect. It was such a stark contrast to the man who'd refused to acknowledge her existence at the Sterling Tower that it almost felt like meeting a different person. As Helen escorted her back to the elevator, Grace's mind was already racing through calculations and possibilities. $180,000 annually would transform her family's life. Jasmine's textbooks would never be a concern again. Her mother could stay in the good care facility. Marcus Jr. could have better asthma medication. Destiny could take the dance classes she'd been asking about for months. But more than the money, there was the work itself, the chance to create meaningful change, to ensure that other talented people of color wouldn't face the barriers Patricia Collins had encountered, the opportunity to use all of her skills. Not just her language abilities, but her insight, her experience, her understanding of what it meant to be underestimated and overlooked. That evening, Grace gathered her 3 children around their small kitchen table. She'd picked up pizza, a rare treat, and now they sat together while she explained the opportunity that had presented itself. Jasmine understood immediately, her eyes lighting up. "Mom, this is incredible. You'd be like, actually using your degree? Doing what you always wanted to do?" "Something like that, baby. Though it's more complicated than just translation work." Marcus Jr. at 13 was more pragmatic. "Does this mean we'd move? I don't want to change schools." "No, honey. Same apartment, same schools. Just Mom would have a different job. Better hours, actually. I'd be home for dinner most nights." "Would you still be tired all the time?" Destiny asked, her 9-year-old wisdom cutting straight to the heart of things. Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "Probably still tired sometimes, sweetie, but a different kind of tired. And I'd have more time with you 3, which is what I want most." "Then you should do it," Jasmine said firmly. "Mom, you've been taking care of us for 7 years. You've sacrificed everything. If this is your chance to have something for yourself, to do work that matters to you, you should take it. Even if it's scary? Grace asked. Even if I'm not sure I can do everything they're asking? Especially then, Jasmine said, sounding so much older than 15. You always tell us that growth happens outside our comfort zone. Maybe it's time you followed your own advice. Grace looked at her 3 children. Her brilliant, resilient, beautiful children who'd weathered so much loss and hardship with remarkable grace, and felt a surge of determination. They deserved a mother who pursued opportunities instead of playing it safe. They deserved to see her using her talents fully, not hiding them under a uniform out of necessity and fear. The next morning, Grace called Marcus Hale's personal cell number. "I've reviewed the contract with my attorney," she said when he answered, "and I've discussed it with my children. I have a few small modifications I'd like to request, but if you can accommodate them, I'm prepared to accept the position." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Marcus's voice came through, warmer than she'd ever heard it. "Grace, you have no idea how happy I am to hear that. Send me the modifications. If they're reasonable, and knowing you they will be, we'll have the revised contract ready by this afternoon. When can you start? I need to give the Sterling Tower 2 weeks' notice. Tom has been good to me, and I won't leave him short-staffed. So 2 weeks from today. Fair enough, that gives us time to prepare your office and set up your team. Helen will coordinate everything. And Grace, thank you for taking a chance on us. I promise I won't waste it." Grace's final 2 weeks at the Sterling Tower were surreal. Word had spread about her new position. She'd asked Marcus to keep it quiet, but someone from Hale Industries had leaked it to a business reporter, and suddenly there was a small article in the business section. From server to executive, the Cinderella story of Grace Patterson. Grace hated the headline. She wasn't Cinderella. This wasn't about magic or luck. This was about talent that had always existed but had been overlooked by people who couldn't see past her uniform. This was about finally getting the opportunity to use skills she'd maintained through years of hardship, but the attention brought unexpected benefits. Several customers at the Sterling Tower went out of their way to congratulate her, and her tips increased significantly. Her co-workers threw her an impromptu goodbye party, with Tom making a heartfelt speech about how she'd been the best damn server in Manhattan, and about to be the best damn executive too. On her last day, Grace found an envelope tucked into her locker. Inside was a check for $12,000 and a note in Marcus Hale's handwriting. "For your daughter's textbooks. Consider it a signing bonus, or an apology, or just recognition that talent deserves support even before the official start date. M.H." Grace stared at the check, feeling tears stream down her face. Not just because of the money, though it would solve immediate problems, but because of what it represented. Someone seeing her struggle and choosing to help. Someone recognizing her worth not despite her circumstances but inclusive of them. She deposited the check that afternoon and immediately paid for Jasmine's textbooks, her mother's care facility bill, and Marcus Jr.'s new asthma medication. For the first time in 7 years, Grace's checking account showed a balance that wasn't terrifying. It wasn't wealth. She was still working class, still carrying debt, still one emergency away from financial stress, but it was breathing room. It was possibility. Her first day at Hale Industries was everything she'd hoped and feared. The office they'd prepared for her was beautiful. Windows overlooking the city, modern furniture, a bookshelf waiting to be filled with her language dictionaries and international business texts. Helen introduced her to her new team, 2 junior translators, a cultural consultant who'd worked extensively in Asia, and an executive assistant who would help coordinate her inclusion initiative work. But the real test came in her first executive meeting. Grace walked into a conference room full of senior leadership, 12 people, 11 of them white men, all of them regarding her with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. Marcus sat at the head of the table and gestured for Grace to take the seat on his right. "Everyone, this is Grace Patterson, our new Director of Inclusion and International Relations. Grace comes to us with exceptional credentials and the kind of perspective this leadership team has been lacking. I expect you to treat her input with the same respect you'd give any other executive at this table. Her authority comes directly from me, and her initiatives have my full support." It was a strong introduction, but Grace knew words were easy. The real work would be proving herself day after day, meeting after meeting, decision after decision. She'd face resistance, microaggressions, people who questioned her authority or expertise. She'd encounter the same obstacles Patricia Collins had faced, just with more explicit protection. But as the meeting progressed and Grace offered her first insights, catching a potential cultural misunderstanding in a proposed Japanese partnership, suggesting alternative language for a Korean contract that would be more respectful and effective. She saw something shift in the room, skepticism giving way to attention, dismissiveness replaced by genuine interest. One executive, a white-haired CFO named Robert Chen, actually smiled at her suggestion and said, "That's brilliant. We've been struggling with that Korean deal for weeks. Grace, can you take the lead on reworking that proposal?" "Of course," Grace said confidently. "I'll have a revised draft on your desk by Friday." After the meeting, Marcus caught up with her in the hallway. "That was impressive. You handled Robert perfectly. He's usually the toughest one to win over." "I wasn't trying to win anyone over," Grace said honestly. "I was just doing my job." "I know, that's what made it impressive." Marcus paused, then added quietly, "Grace, I know this is just the beginning. I know we're going to face challenges and setbacks and moments where you question whether this was the right decision. But I want you to know, I'm committed to this, to the work you're doing, to the changes we need to make. You're not alone in this." Grace looked at him, this complicated man who'd begun as her harshest critic and somehow become her strongest advocate, and nodded. "I'm holding you to that, Mr. Hale." "Marcus," he corrected gently. "We're colleagues now, partners in this transformation." "Marcus," Grace repeated, testing out the informality. It felt strange but also right, acknowledging the shift in their relationship from server and customer to professional equals. 6 months later, Grace stood in front of the Hale Industries Board of Directors, presenting the results of her inclusion initiative. The statistics told a compelling story. Employee satisfaction up 23%, particularly among women and employees of color. Retention rates improving across all demographics. 3 major international deals closed successfully with her cultural guidance. And perhaps most importantly, a 40% increase in diverse candidates in the hiring pipeline. But numbers weren't the whole story. Grace also shared testimonials from employees who felt for the first time that their perspectives were valued. She showed the board the mentorship program she'd established, pairing junior diverse talent with senior leadership. She outlined the unconscious bias training that had become mandatory for all levels of the organization. When she finished, the board chair, a woman in her 60s named Margaret Rhodes, stood and applauded. The rest of the board followed suit. "Ms. Patterson," Margaret said, "this is exactly the kind of transformational leadership we hired Marcus to bring to this company, and it's clear he's assembled a team that can execute that vision. On behalf of the board, thank you for your exceptional work." After the presentation, Marcus walked Grace back to her office. "You were incredible in there." Margaret never applauds anyone. "The work speaks for itself," Grace said, though she couldn't hide her smile. "This is what happens when you actually invest in inclusion instead of just talking about it. It's what happens when you have the right person leading the charge." Marcus paused at her office door. "Grace, I've been thinking, as we expand internationally, particularly into African markets, we're going to need someone who can navigate those cultural complexities. Would you be interested in a VP position? Vice President of Global Inclusion and International Strategy. Significant salary increase, seat at the executive table for all major decisions, and the budget to build a much larger team." Grace felt her breath catch. VP, executive leadership, the kind of position that had seemed impossibly distant when she was pouring water at the Sterling Tower. She started to speak, then stopped, overwhelmed. "You don't have to answer now," Marcus said quickly. "Think about it. Talk to your family. But Grace, you've earned this. Not because I'm trying to make amends anymore, but because you're genuinely one of the most talented leaders I've ever worked with." That evening, Grace sat at her kitchen table with her children, a scene that had played out countless times over the years, but somehow different now. The pizza was still from the local shop, but now they could afford extra toppings. The apartment was the same, but there were plans to move to a larger place in a better neighborhood next year. Jasmine was thriving at Harrington Academy, no longer worried about textbook costs. Marcus Jr.'s asthma was well controlled with proper medication. Destiny had started those dance classes and discovered she was talented. "Mom looks happy," Destiny observed, her 9-year-old wisdom as sharp as ever. "I am happy, baby," Grace said, pulling her youngest into a hug. "I'm very happy." "Because of the VP thing?" Jasmine asked, having overheard the conversation when Marcus had called to follow up on the offer. "Partly, but mostly because I get to come home to you 3 every night. Because we're not just surviving anymore. We're actually building something. And because I finally feel like I'm using all the gifts God gave me. not hiding them to make other people comfortable. Dad would be proud, Marcus Jr. said quietly. Grace felt tears prick her eyes. Her children rarely mentioned their father anymore. The grief had softened over 7 years into something more like a gentle ache. But her son was right. Michael would have been proud, not of the title or the salary, but of how she'd raised their children, how she'd persevered through impossible circumstances, how she'd never lost sight of who she was, even when the world tried to make her invisible. Yes, Grace said, her voice thick with emotion. He would be. The next morning, Grace called Marcus and accepted the VP position, and as she sat in her office overlooking Manhattan, preparing for another day of challenging work and meaningful change, she thought about the man who'd once told her he didn't talk to maids. That man had been transformed by a lesson he hadn't known he needed to learn. But more importantly, Grace had been transformed too, not by Marcus's recognition, but by her own courage in refusing to stay invisible, in demanding the respect and opportunities she'd always deserved. The arrogant billionaire had learned to see people he'd once overlooked, but the low-class Maid had remembered something far more important. She had never been low-class at all. She had always been exactly who she was: brilliant, talented, resilient, and worthy. It had just taken the right moment and the right courage to step fully into that truth. And once she did, nothing and no one would ever make her feel small again. 2 years after Grace Patterson walked through the doors of Hale Industries as Vice President of Global Inclusion and International Strategy, the company unveiled its newest initiative at a press conference that attracted national media attention. Standing beside Marcus Hale at the podium, Grace announced the Patterson Scholarship Fund, a $10 million endowment providing full educational support for children of single parents pursuing careers in international business and technology. This fund represents a simple truth, Grace told the cameras, her voice steady and confident. Talent exists everywhere. Opportunity does not. We're committed to changing that. In the audience sat Jasmine, now 17, and headed to Columbia University on a full scholarship. Beside her were Marcus Jr. and Destiny, watching their mother with undisguised pride. Also in attendance was Patricia Collins, who now served as a consultant on Hale Industries' Inclusion Board. When Grace finished speaking, Patricia stood and applauded, tears streaming down her face. After the conference, Marcus pulled Grace aside. "You know this scholarship was your idea, but you insisted on putting my name on it too. Why?" Grace smiled. "Because transformation isn't about one person's redemption or another's vindication. It's about what we build together when we choose to see each other clearly. You learned to look beyond uniforms. I learned that second chances can be genuine. And together, we're creating opportunities for people who might otherwise remain invisible." Marcus nodded, understanding finally settling in his eyes. "Thank you, Grace, for everything. Thank you for finally learning to see." If this story moved you, support our channel. Like the video, subscribe for more emotional stories, and tell us where you're watching from.